As I say, as we as a community have moved through this crisis, we have a lot to be proud of. We came out of a retreat in which most people here didn't know much about what was happening in the world. A state of great clarity. And then, very naturally, very appropriately, the panic of the world entered the community. And we were infected by that, first and foremost. As we went on the internet, as we talked to people, we're so caught up in this frenetic response that it seemed completely normal to them. Because human beings are like this. What other people are doing is taken as authoritative, as reasonable in general. And so we contacted the world and took on those views and processed them. And it took us as a community about 5 days to process that, which most of the world hasn't processed in 5 weeks. That's amazing. It's very impressive. And of course, we took steps to work with this crisis here and handled it well from an objective point of view, but even more impressive, we handled it well in the subjective world. From a subjective point of view, we worked with our thoughts and emotions around dying. We did that every day. And we made it normal to do that. This is courageous, it's inspiring, and it's heroic. Because, as I often say, peace on earth is just this. It is simply a world in which everyone dies and no one kills. Well, good news. We're halfway there. Everyone dies. Everyone dies. Everyone, without exception, dies. But the second part is a major problem. It's a big problem. Our choices kill many humans and also many living beings. The choices that we make, especially in terms of our economy, cause enormous destruction of life. And why is that? It's because we haven't faced the first part of it. We haven't faced the fact that everybody dies. We haven't faced the fact that we die. Because we're unwilling to die, we are willing to kill. Because we haven't gained equanimity with death, we give ourselves over to killing. The way we get to the point when we are willing to change how we live so that we don't destroy life is by accepting the fact that life ends. This very life. The goal of life isn't to make sure that we never die. On the contrary, that which is born dies. And the purpose of life is to see that accept it, and live accordingly. Everything that comes into being falls out of being. Everything that exists doesn't exist. That's how it is. Everything that comes together comes apart. We have a spiritual path in order to come to terms with this, accept it, and discover that suffering is not caused by that process. Suffering is caused by resisting that process. Because we resist our own death, we cause the destruction of life on the planet. And we have the opportunity through a spiritual practice to change that. Why is it that non-self is so emphasized in the Buddhist path? Why is that? Well, there are many reasons, but one of them is that in general, global destruction is caused by the attempt to bring local benefit. When we do things that destroy life, it's not because we're trying to destroy life on Earth. There are very few people who are trying to destroy life on Earth. I don't know even one. But we're doing a good job of it. We are moving in that direction very quickly, and why? Because we do things that cause local benefit. We do things that are good here, despite the fact that it causes bad elsewhere. When people do things that cause great harm, in general, it's because of an attempt to do good on a smaller scale. So the problem of, say, the climate crisis. People aren't trying to cause mass destruction around the world. We're just doing things that cause some benefit right here. We make choices in order to do good locally, but those choices cause harm globally. It's very difficult for us to overcome this problem. And the way it's overcome is through the experience of what you might call non-self. Don't be selfish. Set aside attachment to the local. Drop that. It's not that you have to stop functioning in terms of the local. We exist locally. See? Proof. So we acknowledge that that's how it is, that that's reasonable. That's how life functions. But it's essential if we want peace on earth, which we do want, that we know how to set aside a sense of self. That sense of self is local to this mind and body. It is also local to a community. A lot of us, we experience oneself as being a community. This is myself. My family, my friends are myself. If my family or friends are hurt, I feel hurt. Some of us experience myself as a nation or a worldview. We learn in this practice to drop all of that. That's what spirituality is. It's the opposite of what most people think of as religion. Most people, religion means that you have a very concrete sense of us versus them. For most of us, we think of religion as holding on to a certain perspective. But if we're holding on to a certain perspective, then that will cause us to bring forth benefit within that perspective without regard to harm outside of that perspective. That's the problem. To let that perspective die is the challenge. To let this mind die is the challenge. To let this body die is the challenge. Not to kill, not about killing, not about destroying. It's about seeing that it is our nature to pass away. We are, you could say, ultimately selfless. We give everything away that we have taken. Everything. We don't hold on to anything in the end. We borrow it and we give it back. All of it. All of it. To come to terms with this, accept it, and even rejoice in it, is the significance, the purpose of the spiritual path. And when we do that, then we know how to live in a way that doesn't kill. We're capable of that because we've given up the thing that made us incapable of that. That being attachment to, quote, self, which you could say is a certain way of looking at things. That's a way of defining self. I was talking to a friend today, and he summarized the current human response to the coronavirus as internalized fear expressed in inappropriate ways. Internalized fear expressed in inappropriate ways. Now again, this is someone who has faced death. And I asked him during this conversation, because I've been asking a lot of people who have faced death, why did you do that? And his answer was the same as mine and other people who have, everyone I've asked about this, who has really faced this, has given the same answer, and they say, I didn't have a choice. I wouldn't have if I could have avoided it. But I didn't have a choice. At one point, I was talking about being in the monastery and feeling like I was imprisoned. I couldn't leave. I wanted to leave. There's nothing more I wanted to do than leave. I was being asked to do something that I didn't want to do at all, namely face death. And face the fact that we die. That's how it is. I didn't want to face that. I felt, this is my life. That's that. This is my life. No, I said. No. And I see this reaction in many people now as we're being asked to face death. No. No. That sense of being 3 years old or even younger. That level of fear and helplessness and vulnerability that we never resolved at that age comes out. And I was talking to someone about it. I said, it's like I was imprisoned. I didn't want anything more than to leave. It was all I wanted. People think, oh, you're in a monastery, it's so peaceful. It's so wonderful. You're with all these wonderful people, and it's sweet. Well, not for me. For me, I was with these people. I had no desire to be with you people. I have no desire to do this training. I have no desire to face this problem. I only want to get out of here. And I couldn't. And I won't tell his story, but in his case, it was similar in the salient ways. And he just said, I couldn't, I had to face it. I tried not to and I failed. That's why I faced it. But the issue is a lot of the time we have the sense we do have that choice. And when we feel that we have that choice, then rather than facing the fear, we internalize it. And that's called trauma. And we've all been traumatized in this way. Not only have we been traumatized in this life, we've been traumatized in past lives. And whether you want to look at it from the perspective of rebirth, you have life after life, or not, you can still say that we've been traumatized in, quote, past lives, because, again, if you go back to what I discussed earlier, there was a big event, the plague, the Black Death. And to a certain extent, we faced death at that time. And to a certain extent, we did not. We were just traumatized by it. We were traumatized by it as a community, as a civilization. It's possible that 20% of the world population died at that time. That's 1 in 5 people who were alive. That's a traumatic event. It wasn't by any means limited to Europe. And when a society goes through that, different things happen. Good news. Certain major positive changes occurred after that. A sense of equality in the world, to a large extent, was caused by our growth as we went through that event. But in other ways, and there's a flourishing of mysticism after that. What's the purpose of life? Many people started asking that question. And so we see that that was an opportunity that many people took advantage of, attaining spiritual realization as a result. And society grew, evolved as a result. And to a certain extent, we internalized it. We didn't face it. We didn't feel what we felt. It was too scary, too overwhelming, and we didn't have the tools. And I'd suggest that now our response here is caused by that pandemic and by the many pandemics that we've had over the centuries. Again and again, we've become afraid of sickness. And we have the sense in modern times that we're sort of conquering it. And it seems in some way unjust if people are getting sick, if people are dying. It seems like somebody made a mistake. Somebody messed up. We have to do something about that. We get mad and frustrated and start acting like a 3-year-old. And in our conversation, I mentioned that in terms of the training that I've received, it's very difficult to know what's going to happen. That's hard to predict. Not impossible to predict the future. You know a certain amount of information, and you can, to one extent or another, guess about what will happen, or even knowledgeably predict what will happen. But that's hard. But what isn't hard is making a prediction about one thing in particular, and that is suffering. If we act motivated by greed, hatred, or ignorance, suffering will arise. That we can predict. And so it's very hard for me to know exactly what people will do. How will this machine that feeds off of greed, hatred, and ignorance make use of our response to the coronavirus? That's hard to know. I can say that it will, because it doesn't stop. It's very persistent. tenacious in its constant exploitation of every opportunity to take control over the world. This unskillful mind, this unskillful collective, shared, consensual experience. That's just powerful because powerful things get more power. It's just a natural process. That's how things are. And so we can predict that. And we can predict that as we behave according to greed and hatred and ignorance, suffering will come forth. That we can feel very confident in. We can also predict that as we face this with selflessness, with compassion, and with awareness, suffering will be resolved. That we can also predict. And we have the ability to do that. This is actually an incredible opportunity right now for us. This is an amazing invitation for us to grow as individuals and also as a world society. Everybody is focusing on this right now. Even I'm talking about this. I'm just talking about it because everybody's thinking about it. We were already dying, but nobody noticed. And so now I have this opportunity to say, you will die. People say, now, good point. That's true. I hadn't considered that. That makes me feel a lot of things. And so now I can say, great, feel those things. That's awareness. And feel those things without the attempt to prevent the experience of death locally by causing it globally. If we were really able to do that, then we would be concerned about the vast existential threats on this planet right now. And we would be making far more severe changes to our society than we've made over the past few weeks in order to solve those problems that are going to kill billions of people, perhaps end life as we know it. But as I say this, notice the ways in which we don't want to face that, and how that's the same experience as when someone says you're going to die, and your mind just shuts down and goes gray. Says, nah, maybe I'll think about that tomorrow or next year, because it's unclear that it's really going to happen anyway. That's unknown, really. The future is unpredictable. Will I really die? In any case, I have more important things to worry about today. And so that's what I'll do today. Notice how that functions, because this trauma that we experience enables us to fall back into that pattern. As the Buddha said, when we behave in these unskillful ways, suffering results. When we experience suffering, there are two directions we can go in. We can go even further into insanity and then cycle through again. We can go even further into ignorance and cycle through again. Or we can go in search of a way to face and resolve this problem. This moment, do we have faith that there is a solution? If not, then we'll go further insane. Of course, we don't know. We have to have a certain amount of faith. Are we willing to take that risk? Give it a try, see if there's actually a resolution to the problem of death? Or do we go further into this cycle of insanity? If we go further into the cycle, that's called trauma. If we leave that cycle, that's called enlightenment, happiness, peace, skillful behavior. This moment is an opportunity for us to deal with the fact that in pandemic after pandemic, we've dealt with it in unskillful ways. But in pandemic after pandemic, some of us, to a certain extent, have dealt with it in skillful ways. This is an opportunity for us to change, to revolutionize our world so that we can face death. And in doing that, no longer destroy life. That's an incredible opportunity. And the people who are doing it are heroes. That is the heroic activity that's needed. Based on that comes a new civilization, a new world. And that ability to set aside this attachment to myself and my life, to let go of that, it simultaneously resolves the problem of death for ourselves and the selfishness that causes the destruction of life on the planet. If we do that as a community, then we create a culture that on the level of a group awareness, so maybe some people aren't familiar with this, but you have a bunch of neurons in your brain and they facilitate a certain kind of awareness. And yet no neuron has the thoughts that you have. There isn't a neuron that has those thoughts. In the same way, a group of people have a kind of intelligence that no one person has. Well, that kind of intelligence responds to circumstances. For example, the Black Death. And that kind of intelligence holds that knowledge in order to respond in the future. It's at that level that we need to heal in order to resolve the major problems on the planet right now. So when a community of people, such as this one, collectively face death, collectively resolve this problem, then we're resolving it at the communal, at the societal level. If you can do that, even on the civilizational scale, well then, you're saving the world. To have a community of people who are actually doing that, of course, as we already said, it's good because we live in healthy ways, and so we're in good shape. Whatever crisis might come, we've made a pretty good bet on how to deal with it. May not be like this one, but in any case, we have a good chance of working with it skillfully. But beyond that, we have offered our lives as a part of a vast solution. We've created a community that solves these problems at that level so that the group, the societal trauma, can be resolved, and we can no longer inappropriately express internalized fear, but instead appropriately express legitimate fear. For example, the fear of destroying life on the planet. Naturally, it isn't necessary to be afraid in order to solve that problem, but we see in this case how very effective fear has been in motivating people to take action. And so, at a certain level of clarity, we make use of this legitimate concern around our behavior in order to make a difference. We do that because we begin by clarifying internally, overcoming the insanity that comes from not being willing to accept death. Locally, then, we bring that selfless experience, that experience of surrender, into a loving, trustworthy group so that we solve the problem on a communal scale. And then we bring that forth in order to create alliances, create a plan, in order to revolutionize human civilization, in order to take care of the world. This way, we resolve the trauma at these various levels, and we find a new way to live. This is the opportunity that's before us right now. And incredibly, it's an opportunity that we're taking advantage of. We're taking advantage of that, so that true compassion can be expressed, rather than just the little compassion of being worried about me or the people I know getting this virus and this very short-term problem. Even though we are, as I say, lengthening the curve, we're not going to lengthen it that far, maybe a couple years, and then maybe the economic depression will last another 5 or 10 years. So we're worried about that. But we can worry about a much vaster scale in space and time than that, and in doing that, express a much greater compassion, because we've broken through these limiting senses of self, we've set that aside, and we have connected with all living things. This is the opportunity for us right now. For us to take advantage of this opportunity is heroic. Heroic. And we just did it when we did that meditation. We do it as we live here, take care of each other, and we do it as we create plans and alliances for the benefit of the world. So, let us continue in this way, making use of this current change, not merely to be further controlled by certain forces that maintain power for very limited ends, but instead making use of this chance to break free of the limitations that have caused the horrifying problems on the planet at this time. We should continue on, seeing that we can revolutionize our society in a very short time, but we make use of the practice to be sure that we're not doing so based just on internalized fear, on trauma, but on a reasonable and appropriate, wise and compassionate view of the world, so that we can see the true dangers that exist in new technologies, in the climate crisis, in war, which the next major war could easily be terminal. We see the existential risks and we respond to them due to our ability to face the problem of death. And in so doing, learn how to live in a way that saves life.